Good evening here in the room and online. Welcome to Material Worlds Season 2, Episode 1, Solar. This is a speaker series hosted by the Emilio Ambas Institute, the joint study of the built and natural environment at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I'm Lindsay Wickstrom, the host of this series, and I'm delighted to partner with the new institute for our first episode of this season, focused on the most essential material of all, solar. Solar has been consistently governing existence on planet Earth for all of time. Across varying levels of exposure to the sun, this has shaped the way humans navigate the soil, their food, their habitat, their everyday lives. It is the ultimate source of power and is essentially free, still unowned. The amount of energy hitting planet Earth from the sun in 1 hour is the same amount of energy needed to power the Earth for an entire year. The ability to harness this energy is the greatest challenge of our time. Today, batteries require an enormous amount of extraction of precious natural resources like cobalt and lithium, but these are evolving towards more efficient, less extractive forms. An improved ability to capture this energy and harness it will ultimately transform civilization as we know it towards decarbonization. But today, I think in our conversation, we'll go far beyond these ideas of efficiency and technology. Forms of generating energy through solar design reach way back into ancient forms of solar worship and solar rituals, shaping geometry and architecture beyond battery power. The question for our group today is how will we respond to this new knowledge of history as presented at the Solar Biennale above us? How will we as designers tap into this history and continue to critically engage solar as a generative material? This is why Material Worlds has partnered to engage this material. And I'm joined by Matilda Szuchowski, the curator of the Solar Biennial, who will give us a tour, also the co-founders of the Solar Biennial. We are also joined by 4 guests this evening, experts who share different backgrounds, from historians to artists to designers and engineers, but all of us can agree that solar is not just a panel, but actually a generative material. So first, we will hear from artist Alice Wong, who will give us a tour through her vision of a solar-powered world in the form of film. We'll talk to Marianne Van Abel and Pauline Van Dogen about their vision for the solar movement. We'll hear from Alex Nathanson about his work in Brooklyn. We'll hear from designer Peter Niesen from Inside Outside, who will debunk our assumptions that curtains are for blocking sunlight. We'll hear from artist Amor Munoz, who's joining us online, about conversations engaging technology and communities in ways of interpreting solar anew. And finally, engineer Neil Tamain, who will describe to us different ways of distributed networks and engaging cities across vast communities. So with that, we'll go into the exhibition itself, where Matilda will give us a brief tour and set the stage for the conversation. Thank you.
Welcome to the Energy Show, Sun, Solar and Human Power. Today we have a very, very active conversation about energy. And suddenly solar becomes extremely more relevant than it was maybe before. So I'm very happy to say I'm the curator of this show. My name is Matilda Szuchowski, and I was asked by the new institute and the Solar Biennial to make this show happen for you. And I collected a few examples of how designers, architects, artists, scientists, human beings come up with these different types of solar ideas in order to maybe think about different types of energy systems, but also to question themselves and their own energy. And for this show, I work with Noviki, the Warsaw-based graphic design studio, and the spatial designer Dennis van der Broek, and with the very precious help of Ariane van der Veen and Charlie Blödel, who actually, I think, made a lot of these things very much happen. Again, human power. So let me walk through some of these powers and exhibits. So let's start. And you would wonder, how does this start, this energy show? Well, I decided to keep it on a much more timeline-based level in a very holistic approach, starting a story of how before Christ we were always obsessed, and we still are obsessed with the sun and solar power, and how then it informed a lot of design ideas. And one of the design ideas that I encountered in my research is the Dover Sun House, designed or came up with or developed by Maria Telkes, a Hungarian-American scientist and inventor who actually was commissioned by the sculptor Amelia Peabody to design it, and it was one of the first fully functioning solar heated houses that she designed with architect Eleanor Raymond. But it was not only that in architecture and design, but also on the daily life. There were a lot of objects that kind of talked about energy in a wider spectrum, and especially after the oil crisis, after the 70s, suddenly these different types of games popped up. For example, here we have the game Energy Quest, a board game that really talks about energy as a property and how it could be exchanged and valued or devalued and negotiated. And then we have, for example, the solar mobile, a Swiss designer called Jörg Bohner, who in 1992 was a young man who was commissioned to come up with to incorporate or integrate solar technology into a car for the Tour de Sol, which was in Switzerland the first entirely solar-powered race, where vehicles were designed with solar power. And he said actually that back then he really thought that this will change society on the long run, but also afterwards he decided to start design, which is always interesting when this kind of different types of commissions and opportunities arise where people come up with ideas. So we do need these types of opportunities to also continue in our times to think about how solar maybe possibly could inform our world. So here, for example, in the world of technical medical appliances, we have Solar Suitcase by We Care Solar. It's basically designed by an entrepreneur, a woman. Her husband is a doctor, and they thought about the necessity of having a suitcase that is exactly in the shape of of hand luggage. So that people can take it on an airplane, but also have easy access to it, and it's portable, and wherever it needs energy supply for medical reasons, this suitcase meant to be close by. So after we have actually, or you, when we came to the energy show, you have been in this yellow phase of the exhibition, you enter the orange phase of the exhibition, another color that we so strongly associate with the sun, even though the sun is a very complex entity in our solar system that is extremely colorful. We still are going down to only these three colors. So here we have different examples from solar curtains, solar power tables, and different types of solar innovations that traveled the world. And for example, this one, I think, is a very popular one that you these days actually can even find in every museum shop in the world. It's designed by Olaf O. Eliasson and it's called Little Sun, which meant to or was designed for a market in rather third world countries to enable or encourage getting closer to energy justice. But these days it become a very popular kind of object. But maybe a quick one here. This exhibition is full of different types of quotes of people who work in the field of energy. And this, for example, is Shalanda Baker, who wrote a book called Revolutionary Power, an activist guide to the energy transition. And actually today, since actually a month, Shalanda Baker works actually in the Department of Energy in the Biden administration in the US. The next exhibit I want to introduce to you is an exhibit that represents half of the exhibition. It's a moment of transition, and I chose Agnieszka Polska's The New Sun, where a childlike sun, a face looks at the visitor, and the sun observes the environmental and ethnical collapse of the world, and guilt trips the visitor maybe a little bit. Did you hear? Get off the stage, you bastard, the sun says. So, but we continue with the second half of the exhibition, maybe with, what can we do? Let's do Pauline van Dongen's solar shirt. Pauline van Dongen actually has been treating solar literally as a material from the beginning of her practice, where she designs different types of solutions that are kind of incorporated solar technology into fabric. And in this case, it's one of the projects she did in 2020, which basically allows the wearer to have solar technology at the body and having or giving the opportunity to charge your devices wherever you go by wearing solar on yourself. The next project I would like to present you is Living with the Sun by Boudewijn Buitenhek. Boudewijn is a student from the Royal Academy of Arts in Den Haag, and he actually lived for 1 week off the grid. And he realized how hard it is, and during that time he designed 2 devices. One is the coffee grinder, in order for him to grind coffee on a daily basis. And the other one is a boiler, basically a heater, so he can actually make his own coffee. And he tried to grind his own coffee for 1 month, realizing the challenges of being dependent on the sun. Another example of the world of architecture is Perpetual Climate Architecture by Octave Perrault. He actually developed or has been working on a startup that was called Zeroth. And perpetual actually means that something is perpetual motion actually means that something is continuously in motion. And this is not really the design of a startup. It's more a concept phase where they want to show what the heating systems as a solar heat exchanger could look like in architecture, especially when it comes to architecture that's built based on glass. So we're looking forward to see more of what Zeroth and Octave Perrault will come up with it. And then in the third chapter of this exhibition, the red phase, we have mainly commissions, and one of the commissions is based on actually existing research by TACRAM, the London-based research and design agency. The research is called Close to Home, where they want to bring the energy or relationship to energy close to our home. And we thought that we will make, with all the research, a setup that almost looks domesticated, where you have this kind of idea of how the future could look like when even our plants will be replaced by solar technology or solar design. And of course, the question is not only the exhibits or existing exhibits or commissions, but it's also opening up a conversation about solar and us sharing these conversations also with a broader audience. So here we have a work, 6 video channel work by Sue Thomassen, a Dutch videographer and artist. And we invited 6 different people. I wrote the script and she realized the artwork, and you can see 6 people who either live with solar or believe in solar, but also are doubtful about solar. People who live in tiny houses or live with second-hand solar panels, and a conversation between all of them. But they all talk to you through the 4th wall, always considering you to think, will you become a solar citizen? And this is also one of the commissions. Imre Zeeman is an academic and also works in the field of energy humanities. And he wrote a text called Solar Principles on Solarity. And we decided together with the studio Noviki, the graphic designers of the show, that we would like to make some sort of a giveaway, but also talk about this kind of, like almost like treating solar or solarity as a medicine that you would get in a package, and maybe the way you could use it or you have to use it is here as not a way of thinking about solutions, but asking yourself how you could use it or provide the right information of how to use it. And the last fourth chapter of this exhibition is the energy room, a room where you can actually walk in and contribute actively to the energy show. Let me walk you through. Here we have, on one hand, a big room with solar ideas that people either leave here behind on a sheet of paper, sharing their own perceptions of what their solar idea is. But on the other hand, we also had the solar ideas that we have collected together with the solar energy kiosk. That was the first commission of the energy show that traveled first to Milan and then to France, and will possibly also move to other places. But the whole exhibition kind of, meant to lead always to some sort of bigger question. And the question that I wanted to ask is, how would the world look like if it were solar powered? And the person that I thought could answer this the best is Alice Wong. And we are very lucky because Alice Wong is actually here. Alice, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Matilda. Nice to see you again.
Alice, we have commissioned you to produce a video work, an artwork that you actually researched for quite a long time, and you've shared so much knowledge with me actually that I brought into the exhibition. But maybe you can tell the audience, how did you go? How did you start that broad question? How did you tackle that question, and how did you try to answer it?
At first trying to find answers from existing movies, but we couldn't find any interesting answers. So instead I interview a bunch of people across disciplines, around 30 people, professors, students, master students, and then they come up with the answers of like 1,400 minutes, and then we edit down to 6 minutes.
What were the questions that you asked?
There were 3 questions. The first one is of course, how would the world look like if it were solar power, and then their personal relationship with the sun. And then the third question is I asked them to share how to guide us to think along how the future would look like. Yeah.
And can you tell us how many films that you watched? I mean, I would be actually interested to know that now.
Many films. I watched with times 5, times 2 speed, so it was just scrolling over.
But it's like 100 movies or 50 movies?
GBs like movies, yeah. I don't know, 100, 200, 300, yeah.
And I mean, I would say you're a story designer. And of course, what do you think is the story that you want people to keep in mind when they walk out of the energy show after they watched your artwork?
I want people to come to realization, perhaps, the solutions to the energy crisis is not, we should not pass it on to experts. Instead, we should look it from within, what we can do, and we can think along from small things. And solar energy is not really an emergency exit. The problem actually lies within the societal issue. Is a social structure system problem. Yeah.
Would you say it also relies on human power?
Yes, I would say that.
I think that's a perfect ending, Alice. Thank you so much for being here. And your audience, please stick to this, because at the end of Material World Solar, we will actually watch the full artwork of Alice and Chris Cool, who partnered up with, or Alice partnered up with Chris Cool and helping with the editing and compiling the artwork, because you needed a second brain to think along, I believe. So please stay with us. I'm going back now to the auditorium to talk to all these different people that we've invited today to talk about solar as a material, not only for architects, artists, designers, but also for people to think along of how the sun and solar actually function, or has been functioning as a material for a long time, and we have to reconsider these more and more today in our times. So see you in a minute. Thank you. Bye.
So I'll invite our guests to join me up on stage. Thank you. Thank you, Matilda. So, Marianne and Pauline, you have been at the center of this idea of a solar movement, co-founding the Biennial, which was the foundation for the energy show. I think we're all curious, how did this start? Where did this conversation begin for you?
Yeah, it started with us meeting on a conference about the sun, and realized that we felt active to like change things through design, and there we said let's start a movement together. And I remember thinking yeah, that's something that people say when they're having a cocktail in a bar, but actually we did start a movement, and we set up meetings, and we brought a lot of people together.
Yeah, we started looking in our own network because, of course, we already knew that there's a lot happening in the Netherlands, also beyond. But a lot of experts that maybe know of each other's work but don't meet that regularly. And yeah, I think already the first moment we met, we felt the energy in the room, and everyone was very much aligned and shared this idea about this narrative being the narrative of solar being stuck in this technocratic domain, and that we should really change it to create more of a cultural shift.
The technocratic domain is exactly, I think, one of the jumping off points for the work upstairs, how the variety of interpretations of solar is so wide-ranging, and it's almost an invitation to designers coming to the show to rethink what their assumptions about the material is. And I was privy today to hear a conversation earlier between you two where you disagreed on something, and it was a little bit about aesthetics or the kind of visual or invisibility of solar. Can you speak to this kind of difference or range of opinion about aesthetics?
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of like that solar becomes so invisible that you don't notice it. I think if you move a technology through the different cycles of technology adaptation and it reaches the top, it means it's like naturalized. It's like becomes like not a mobile phone, not yet, but our handwriting or our clothing or something. All a technology, but we don't perceive it as a technology. And now the solar panels and roof, we can really see the technology. And there's Matilda again.
Hello, everyone.
So what do we need to do to like really stop seeing that, and really that it's so merged into our daily life, so it's like becomes like part of us?
Yeah, so I don't think it's maybe that much of a disagreement, because I think we're talking about making something so self-evident that you hardly even notice it. I mean, our clothes are, I think, the perfect example. It's a technology, of course, but we don't really consider it being a technology. Now everyone, especially in my field, talks about wearable technology, smart textiles. I think textiles inherently are very smart, even without the technology, because it is technology. What I try to do, or at least by making the solar also visible, that it also has a tactility, that it has, same like in your work, that it has this kind of like patterning and the colorful elements, that all of those material aesthetics are really part of the work in a very thoughtful way.
In a way that it's awakening almost to this new sense, or another kind of sense that we might have, a solar sense. One kind of remaining question on my mind before we go to the guest speakers here. How do you see your practice or the conversation changing as we have kind of entered into this energy crisis today, and how do you find it becoming more and more contemporary or evolving?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. First, I remember when I was talking about like I work in solar. It's like and then I got like the technical questions, like okay, what's the payback time, and kind of like always the same questions. And now it's like the reaction is like, oh, that's really good. That's really what we need now, and it's from everyone. So you really can feel the urgency of everyone you talk to, and there's more sort of people see it makes sense now, and we need it now.
Yeah, and I think it also adds up that nowadays we can also explain people that solar is actually the cheapest source of electricity in most major countries. So that really also creates, you know, another click, I think, in people's minds, because a lot of the time being stuck in this narrative about payback times also really lets people focus on the economic side, even though I don't think we should see it as something economic, because it's, you know, the well-being of our planet and survival of us human beings and other species. So, but again, like for them to like understand that the technology is there, it's available, and it's actually also affordable. Of course, in not in all countries, but in most major countries. So that really, I think, inspires people to act.
Thank you. Thank you for starting this movement, or being part of this movement, and amplifying a lot of folks' work in the energy show. It's fantastic to see. Welcome back, Matilda. Fantastic to see you. Thank you for the tour.
My pleasure.
Okay, now I think we'll move into our first presentation. Do you want to introduce Alex?
Alex Snaveson is a New York-based solar designer, but also an educator. He runs an area of workshops where he uses, you know, DIY methodologies to introduce solar actually into different types of communities, especially communities that want to kind of be energy independent. But I came across Alex mostly because he wrote a book that is called History of Art and Solar Art and Design, and it was actually the first book that I read when I started to research the energy show, because it's a, I mean, we have John Perlin that we're also going to mention in a moment, who wrote this Solar Bible, going really back in time. But what struck me with the book of Alex was also that it was necessary to have a book like that really compiles solar in the air, you know, solar in water, you know. So he really like solar in art, and you really, it's a compendium that you really can dwell in, and you really get closer to a narrative that is not only written, of course, from a Western perspective, but you really took a lot of time, I believe, to look into a really global perspective of what we have and what came up in solar. And I can only say thank you to Alex for writing that book, because it really helped me.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words. Yeah, so my book, A History of Solar Power, Art, and Design, is almost exactly a year old today, actually, coincidentally. But it's really the first interdisciplinary history of creative applications of this technology. So solar power has been around, as you know, John Perlin's incredible work has documented, for thousands of years. And I should say, John's work is really foundational in this space. I think anyone writing anything about solar history who doesn't cite John probably is stealing from him. His work is that important. So, you know, I'm definitely standing on his shoulders for a lot of the more traditional history. But my work approaches this field in a way that tries to connect all of these very siloed mediums. So it's looking at textiles, it's looking at everything from, you know, experimental sound artists to car designers to traditional architectural interventions and more experimental things in the built environment. But I think, like many folks tonight have said, the challenges we face in the energy transition aren't really technical, they're social. And artists and designers have a really important role to play, and history is a really important way to understand that role. A lot of these technologies have come in and out of fashion over the years, and then we've had to turn back to environmental resources because of things like war or environmental catastrophes. We've realized, oh, actually, we do need to value ecology. And so, you know, collaboration and creative thinking are really crucial to this transition. And that's sort of what my goal was with the book, is to sort of tie these things all together and create a foundation for us to work together. Yeah.
May I ask, what is a favorite example of from history that really resonates with you still in your work today?
That's a tough question. I mean, I come to this work primarily or originally as an artist and a multimedia engineer. So my work before I started working with solar in 2014 was, fairly abstract, sort of experimental media art. And so there's a huge history of sound artists working with this technology. So the modern photovoltaic cell was invented in 1954. And really the first artists to begin using it are sound artists. Primarily because it was pretty cheap. You don't need a lot of power to make beeps and bloops. So you can, these are mostly artists working in Manhattan and New York City at the time. They could walk down to Chinatown, upcycle a piece of technology, and connect it to a radio, for example, to make some interesting sounds that are environmentally responsive. So coming to it from this sort of particularly sort of esoteric angle, I really love that. And that's also one of the unique things I try to tie in is, we need the experimental and creative because it allows us to think more expansively and challenge our understanding of infrastructure. We also need the really rigorous work of engineers doing infrastructure in the built environment. And somewhere in the middle of those two is, I think, where change happens.
I mean, it's a fantastic example to imagine people crossing over to Chinatown to source different aspects of solar design in a way. And that kind of reminds me, too, of what you mentioned, how it's a very social experiment or engagement or event, let's say, solar design, designing with solar. Is there another example that you can think of that is this kind of collaboration, cross-disciplinary event in history that might be striking? I think one of the things that has been interesting for me to learn from also the presentation today and the tour of the exhibition is how old this way of designing is and how kind of ancient. I guess we learned that the first solar panel was in the 1800s. So this kind of history is just so fascinating and inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I learned from John Perlin's work that I really try to, think a lot about is this idea of, particularly with solar thermal, this has come in and out of fashion. Like I said earlier, it will sort of rely on something like passive solar architectural design, and then maybe energy, some sort of energy supply becomes very plentiful, and we move away from thinking about efficiency and environmental benefit, and we lean on something like oil, and then we have some other catastrophe, and we sort of go through these changes. But I think that really points to this idea that these technologies, or a lot of these ideas that sort of support even contemporary technologies, are hundreds, if not maybe thousands of years old, and we really do need to value different types of expertise, different types of cultural perspectives, indigenous perspectives, to be able to ethically address the climate crisis and not sort of build in the sort of problems of our existing world into the world we're trying to build. And I do think like history is sort of the best way to sort of think about that and learn from our mistakes and move forward in a more equitable way. So, yeah.
It was interesting that also reading from your book that some historical events had such an impact on the development of solar cells. For example, the space race, where it really made sense to have solar panels on board because there was always sun, and that really fastened up this development so much. It's really to look back at that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fascinating, yes. So Matilda is answering online questions. I would like to also invite anyone to think of questions that you might have. In Material Worlds, we have a kind of running question in the chat box, so if there's any that you want to mention, please feel free. But it seems like you're managing. She's not writing emails, she's, yes.
I'm tempted very, but I was just answering because everyone was interested on who is actually sitting in the panel from left to right.
Oh, fantastic.
So
Okay,
I did
great.
that.
Should have had name tags. That's great. Well, thank you, Alex. Now we'll hear from Peter. Thank you, yes. Peter Nielsen from Inside Outside.
Yes. Hi. I'm here to tell you a bit more about the solar curtain that we made, well, we started in 2013, I think, and I think the final sample that you're seeing now was finished in 2015. But it all started in 2002. You see here this picture, you see Petra Blaise on the left and Irene Kuruli, who was then a colleague of ours at Inside Outside. It started in 2002 with a competition, which was called Architecture for Humanity. And the brief of the competition was to design a mobile HIV clinic for the sub-Saharan countries. So we decided a textile with integrated solar cells, and we created big triangular shapes that you could zip together to create bigger surfaces, and then you could you could easily take it on your bike and then transport it to everywhere where it was needed. You could zip them together to create this bigger surface to gain solar energy and at the same time create a shade. And with the energy you could either cool medicines in the fridge, or you could boil water, electrically heat it or whatever. Well, we didn't win this competition, unfortunately, but in 2013 then the Textile Museum in Tilburg asked us to design a fabric for their collection, and we then immediately thought, oh, let's take up the idea of the solar cells again. And the program of the Textile Museum was actually building with textile. It was for them to explore the possibilities of textiles in architecture, and that's one of the reasons I think they asked us. And for the solar curtain, we were also introduced to a small Dutch company called Solar Fiber. And they wanted to create a photovoltaic yarn or thread with which you could make textiles that would be a solar panel in itself. Well, that sounded like music in our ears, but unfortunately they hadn't been developed it yet then. But they helped us a lot with all the technicalities of this solar curtain. And so here you see, on the left you see the final sample, which is exhibited here. And on the right you see a small detail of it. We decided to do a knitting structure, because we had to combine three things in this textile. We had to integrate the solar technique. We had to make three-dimensionality to integrate the solar cells, and we wanted to make it transparent. And for all these three elements, knitting seemed to be the most ideal technique, because knitting actually, you do it with one continuous thread, and that was excellent for the conductive yarn, because you don't want to interrupt that. So that was one thing. The three-dimensionality you can do easily with knitting, because you can increase or decrease stitches, and then you can make all kinds of pockets or bulbs or openings, whatever. And third one, actually openings, so the transparency we could do also with the knitting with what they call azure stitches. And everybody probably knows them from all these mostly women pullovers with all these little holes. Actually on the, I think the next image, yes, you see on the left, you see some of the stitches we developed together with Serena, who was a genius on the knitting machine in the Textile Museum. She did a lot of program, because what we learned is that although knitting is beautiful and looks very easy when you do it with two knitting needles, but actually to program a knitting machine takes up a lot of information, because it's all 3D. Apparently, it takes a lot of memory from the computer. On the right side, you see the final layout of the curtain, where you see that there's a gradient from the transparent from the bottom and going more opaque to the top, which we intended to do so because at the bottom probably you have the least light. So then the next image, yes, that shows the layout of the curtain itself. And you see, actually, we wanted to make a curtain because you can also take it away when it's a gray day and there's well, there used to be a lot in the Netherlands. We had a beautiful summer now. So, but on a grey day, you want to have your windows open and want to be able to have all the daylight in. So that's why we wanted to make it pliable. And the vertical dashed lines that you're seeing are the pleating lines. And then to be able to pleat it, the solar cells, which are here, the white blocks, should be alternating, because otherwise they would hit each other, and they're monocrystalline silicon solar cells. Yes, I remember properly, I think. And they are tough, but they can break, I think. So that was one thing. The other thing was, of course, the conductive yarns. You have pluses and minuses, and they shouldn't meet either when you fold it, because then, well, you get a crash of bzzz. You don't want that, so that's why we put the red ones. Well, you can imagine when you fold it, red comes on red and blue comes on blue, and then at the right corner everything comes separately together, and then it goes to a battery or something. On the right you see a tiny little test, and you see Ralph Jacobs from Solar Fiber, where we tested if the solar panels and the whole system, if it really worked. You see a tiny little fan, and with a pale sun in Tilburg that day, we could even make it run, which was, yay, great. It works. But also, then Ralph could calculate what would be the outcome if we covered the whole facade of the Textile Museum with a solar curtain. And apparently, Petra told me, I don't remember, but she said, the knitting machine, one knitting machine of the Textile Museum could work for a whole year on this solar curtain. So that was quite good. I actually forgot to say at the first image there was, we made a whole study case for the Textile Museum, and as a hot climate, as a cold climate, and we wanted to put a hot climate against it, and there we used the Public Library of Doha in Qatar. We used that as a study case. And what was interesting about that image is that actually in a hot climate, the angle of the solar panels is totally different. It's much more horizontal.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Peter. That
Okay.
was fantastic. Oh, there it is again.
Yeah, that's the outer shape.
Fantastic. Okay, now we'll go to Amor Munoz. Can you hear me? Hello. Okay, fantastic. Do you mind? Oh, she's frozen. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, dear Lindsay. Thanks to MoMA and Het Nieuw Institute for the invitation to be part of this very interesting conversation. So for a long time, I have been working with the technology handcraft relationship, specifically textiles and electronics, creating different strategies for collaborative projects that involve exchange of knowledge, technological access, appropriate technologies, and technodiversity. So I'm interested in experimenting with matter, especially not tactile matter, such as sound and electricity. I seek to transform hard and rigid language of engineering into a soft and flexible language like textiles to create alternative technologies using the golden thread, the solar energy. So in 2014, I moved to the peninsula of Yucatan to open a local technology laboratory. The process was hard. It was complicated because I'm not local. I'm not from the community. So a foundation introduced me with a group of Mayan women artisans who were very interested in transforming their crafts into useful technologies. They commented on the need to have solar panels for their community because they have their access to electricity is limited. So we start the project. We start Yucatec Energy by hand. So Yucatec is a local technology laboratory to generate collective work for the solution of local problems through technological appropriation or appropriate technology using solar energy and combining indigenous artisan techniques, combining local and natural materials like enequén is a local fiber, with open source technology and new materials. So the exchange of knowledge is a central point to generate in group technologies with identity. This is very important because that generates an emotional connection, an emotional bond between user and technology. The idea to involve the concept of technodiversity created by the philosopher Juk Hui is to make visible other knowledge that appropriates contemporary technology with other perspectives, other directions, with a collective sense of social and environmental well-being. So the result has been a series of low-cost and useful photovoltaic textiles devices and lighting objects for the population. After Yucatec, the format of the pattern of that lab has been interesting because the format, the pattern is the same, but the results are very different because the needs change in each territory and results change. And that practice becomes organic. So to finish this short intervention, I want to share a recent project called Flujo, in which, well, in English is flow. Flujo is a sound sculpture hand-woven by artisans from Ecuador. It was a commission from the Biennale of Cuenca, in which combines local and traditional techniques and materials with contemporary technologies like thread and flexible photovoltaic. So Flow or Flujo is a poem about technodiversity. It's an ancient device of flying rivers and solar threads that collect solar energy to flow to a series of speakers in different water sounds. And that sounds together like white noise. So we can see in this sculpture the concept of organic and inorganic, an analogy of the electrical system with water, flow, river, and current. Thank you.
Thank you, Amor. Thank you so much. Okay, last but not least, Neil Tamain.
Well, this is an image of, in Nairobi. This is one of the largest slums that you see in Nairobi. This image doesn't really have any solar panels on it, but it gives you a perspective of how electrification or the grid is accessed in many parts of the world. And why this image is really powerful is because you see these haphazardly arranged towers with cables strewn right across it. But the biggest challenge in a situation like this is that energy is still unreliable. It's usually things that people need to steal from. It's not something that they can use when they need to. They have to pay extremely high prices, maybe 10 times more than what you and I pay in our homes. And it's still something that they're not being able to use. And this is the current design or offering that we have in terms of current day solutions. And as you look into the other slides beyond this in terms of images, you've also seen how design has played a major role in enabling energy access around the world, especially in regions in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where energy poverty has been a big challenge. SDG 7, the mission to get clean and affordable energy access to all, has been a challenge, but designers have designed these less than $5 solar lamps that have been extremely effective in at least enabling a start of people to start getting energy access. And over 100 million of these similar lamps have been sold around the world, And people actually own these systems. They are independently run. They charge them on their own convenience and use them when they like it. So the independence and autonomy that people get through using an energy device like this enables a lot of fundamental activities at home, whether it's taking care of your little child at home, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's cooking. A lot of these things that we take for granted at home sometimes make a big difference when design plays a major role in that. And this is an image that I would like to imagine for the future in some ways. This is an image of a rooftop in a riverine island in Bangladesh, a small place called Patuakhali. In this image, when you look at it carefully, there are over 40 different sizes of solar panels that are differently strewn across the entire rooftops. And why this image is really powerful to me is because this is what a village in Bangladesh looks like. When you think of Bangladesh, you don't think of the largest solar market on the planet. About 6 million households in Bangladesh have solar panels as their primary energy source. 10-year-old kids that have grown up in a community like this understand solar panels and solar design a lot better than most of us cumulatively could, because they've lived with this. They understand how batteries work. They know how panels need to be oriented and when they need to be oriented in a certain way. And this particular system is still restrictive in some ways, because you can power a couple of light bulbs, but people's aspirations and dreams have grown since then. People want to start powering, a little refrigerator, a TV, maybe your electric rickshaw, and that's not something that's as accessible anymore. So a small startup called SoulShare basically interconnected these energy systems to enable energy trading. And at Space 10, where I work at in Copenhagen, we tried to visualize this complex sounding swarm electrification method to make it more tangible. So we built a 50-to-1 scaled down version of a hypothetical village where some of the households have panels, some of them don't. There's a simple blockchain interface that enables the energy trading, making it completely independent so that you don't need a regulator. It can be run independently. And individuals, instead of being passive consumers of energy, become active participants in not only consuming the energy, but also selling energy back to the grid, back to their neighbors, and pooling all their energy together to power larger appliances if they could. So, yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. This is very incredible. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about your work. I think if we were to draw a thread from all of these projects, I think interestingly, there's a kind of invisibility aspect. So there's a sense of reaching back to history to really draw forward narratives that might have been lost or misrepresented. There's a sense of economy that is really rich in every story on the tonight in tonight's session. An understanding of the value, so not only the cost, but the value of solar and solar energy and solar design, but also this sense of softness and open sourceness, let's say, with the textiles. We have 3 projects thinking about how individual threads come together to form this tapestry. So I'm kind of thinking out loud how we might kind of connect the projects, and I also actually want to start with you first, Neil. You mentioned that the education of folks in these neighborhoods in Bangladesh is quite different, and it seems like there's a potential, for the energy show and for this work in book publication to start a new generation of energy thinkers and solar designers. How have you personally experienced that, or how have you what is your opinion about that sort of education and next generation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. I'm a solar engineer as per se. I think this is the kind of academic domain I come from, but I haven't really worked with solar panels until I really stepped into a village like that. When you're actually going into someone's household that's lived with a solar panel all their life, which is very few of us that even in this room or around the world at this point. They have a different way of using it, perceiving it, and optimizing their energy use with the little that they have. It's not like they have a lot. They can power a couple of light bulbs and maybe charge a mobile phone, but when they time how they do that. So it's not just about the design of the system itself, but it's design of the system around it. It's not just the solar panel or the battery. It's not the technology, but it's the system that goes along with it that they think about so differently. That's been really inspiring. And I think looking at how people were navigating around their energy systems inspired us to actually start designing new systems around it so that we could facilitate energy trading more succinctly and more easily, so that it could be a system that functions irrespective of relationships that they're struggling with around.
So their everyday life is transformed. I think that that was a topic that we talked about earlier today, and I'm curious to go back to Marianne and Pauline to think about everyday life, especially in the sense of clothing, and how that kind of open source, knitted, wearable, person by person customization might be a foundation for the next generation of solar design.
Yeah, well, I think our clothes and textiles, of course, are having this very personal dimension. Like, it's a super intimate material in that sense. It touches our skin, or at least we're with our bodies constantly in touch with all kinds of textiles. And that's why I think it's such a wonderful medium also to work with in relation to solar, because it's literally making solar inviting to the touch and really engaging, like you said, creating a solar sense, like engaging all the senses in solar. So yeah, I brought some samples. Maybe it's nice to show them as we're talking about it. So this is thin film solar, actually. That's where we created a pattern with printed electronics to interconnect all these different solar cells. And it's laminated with a heat press kind of method onto the textile. So you can see how it still remains quite drapey. This is already from quite some years ago, and it's quite heavily laminated, but I think by now at least it could already be much thinner. And what I like about it also is that it brings a new aesthetic, or kind of graphic feature to it as well. And yeah, Neil, you were talking about how these people that live with solar panels, how they have this kind of very much embodied knowledge of how solar panels work in their everyday environment. For me, also wearing this T-shirt also generated that kind of knowledge and really helped me to move away from thinking of solar as something that's purely about energy. Because when you wear the shirt, obviously you can do something with the energy that you generate when you are out in the sun or in the light. But it also really helps you attune to the weather conditions, for example. Or when I was at a festival or a party, people would actually entrust me with their phones so that I could give them some juice. So it also opened up new social connections, seriously. Also I noticed that as much as I liked to walk outside with it in the sun, I also would find this shirt enjoyable at nighttime, or in the evening when I was wearing it. So there's much more to it than just the energy generation of it itself. And I think these are things that you learn when you actually really indeed deal with and live with these artifacts.
Yeah, I think the issue of scale is something that we've also touched on tonight. We have really small threads, or the idea of solar threads being this very microscopic, small element coming together to create this large piece, or an entire city covered in a connected, distributed network. I'm curious to hear, yes, Marianne, your idea about scale, and also from Petter, your kind of sense of this when you're working with textiles across, bringing this together, these small threads into large tapestries. So maybe Marianne first.
Yeah, so I really see solar as a material, like how a ceramicist uses clay. You can build plates with it, but you can also build houses with it. So it really can have so many different forms. That's what I do as well. So I have so many different technologies I've worked with. So it can be flexible, transparent, colored sheets, or it's glass, or it's something that I never worked with textile yet. But you can really scale it up, have it small, and that's what I love, to really see it as a material.
Yes, and I have exactly, well, not exactly, but more the opposite, because you say how can you make such a big thing out of such a thin thread? But that's what we do every day. I mean, that's with weaving, knitting, or whatever you do. You can make it as big as you want. But the thing in our business, because we work mainly with architecture, is that, and we mainly work in public buildings, and then we are bound to really restrictions of low maintenance, easy to clean, fireproof, everything. So in that sense, for us, it's very difficult to because it's not there yet. It's not there. The yarn is not there. So we are still. We made it with these big blocks, the monocrystalline, because they're the most efficient. And I just asked Neil. I said, "Is it still the same?" And you said, "Yes, it's still." And so our dream of these beautiful, lovely, round solar cells, I'm not sure if we can do it in our scale.
Yeah, not quite yet. I mean, I think building on from what you're describing about collaboration across industries, because this idea that the thread itself has to be innovated at the same time that the tapestry is being imagined. And Amor, you're working with multiple people across disciplines and across communities with a different sense of knowledge and interpretation of solar. What has been your experience?
Well, solar energy, it has been important in the community, but for example, the technologies to create solar power, I think it cannot be resolve all the problems, but it's an option. In my case, with these experiments with all those laboratories, something very important is not to think only in one technology, is to think in different ways to create that technologies. In this case, the solar panels. For example, the government in Mexico have different politics in that communities, and they send solar panels. But that objects are global objects. But in the communities, when they receive that objects, they don't feel identification, and they don't feel interest about that technological objects like a solar panel, and they don't use it. They don't find a sense to use it. So the point with this kind of projects is to create that technologies with identity, with the local techniques, with local materials, with recycle, and yes, local stuff, no, mixing and combining with that contemporary technologies, no, like conductive thread and solar cells. So the result is very positive, because when the people confect, when the people create their own technology, they have this connection of affect, of bond with the object. No, I really like to make visible that a beautiful relation, emotional relation between user and technology.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that's another kind of common thread among the work here tonight, is this idea of hands-on workshops, because I know that the Solar Biennial and the Energy Show will have this type of programming in the future. What is your opinion, and I'm kind of throwing this out to the group as a way to transition, also to invite our audience here and online to add some questions to the conversation, but while we kind of transition in that way, what has your experience been building a workshop or getting everyone around the table to engage and kind of create their own solar identity? And I saw, Neil, you were nodding a lot, so maybe you want to kick us off with this kind of response.
No, I think I really loved how she put it in terms of making a product or a solution more in tune with the community. If it's just something that's planted there and it has been handed out to you, there is no sense of ownership. And this is something I've also seen around the world, especially when it comes to energy access. When something, even out of philanthropy, is just handed out to someone, there is no sense of ownership. And until you really own the product, until you feel that you can do things with it, you can change your life, you can customize it to your own needs, you don't really want to use it as long as we could. And I think that perspective in using community solutions, getting them engaged in owning the solution, and designing it and being active participants in that is been really, really valuable for us while designing technology as well. And sadly, most of the technology that's developed around the world is in these black boxes inside labs. And I'm really glad that we're hosting this Solar Biennale here, because if we didn't have people imagining these radical solutions and engaging with people that are not as actively part of these conversations, we won't think about it differently. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Alex?
So by night, I'm marginally a solar historian, but by day, my design studio focuses on solar education design and solar pedagogy. And a big part of that is thinking about ways to bring in the opportunities for tinkering and play and sort of creative intervention into photovoltaic technologies and clean energy technologies more generally. But I think these ideas that have been sort of present in lots of non-sort of engineering aspects of education have a role in the energy transition for all the reasons that Amor and Neil were speaking to, in terms of allowing people to be able to apply local materials and techniques and take sort of creative ownership of these things. So I do think we need to move past just purely a sort of efficiency-oriented, engineering-oriented approach to teaching these things.
Absolutely. Matilda, do you want to say anything about the workshops? Will you be here? Or Marianne and Polly?
Sorry, which kind of workshops?
Well,
Yeah.
I can pitch in.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we are hosting actually
Yeah.
a really nice workshop program. We are calling it the Sundays, the zondagen. They're not all on a Sunday because every day should be a Sunday. But actually, part of the biannual is not just to be within an institute and watch and experience a beautiful exhibition, but to also be out there on the street where the sun shines, where people meet, especially on markets and squares, and to inspire and also educate everyone, and so that all of these voices can be heard and can join in creating a solar future. So actually, if you look on the Biennale program and you are in Rotterdam, you should definitely come by.
Fantastic. Perhaps also about the kiosk, because that's a very hands-on.
I missed for a second. I thought I missed something, but of course, of course, the biennial has workshops. But I think for us it was important in the conversation with the whole team, with Ariane van der Veen, who's the program manager at the new institute, and also with Charlie and also with Eric. We really thought that it's important to have to go and take the topic beyond the institution. And it's really hard, like programming, you make it with the people or you make it for the people, and the formula is never really quite right. So we thought about the kiosk as a structure that can actually be in different spaces and in different places. And one thing that I've really learned by doing this or curating this exhibition is that we still have the difficulty to grasp what energy or solar energy actually means, the quantity of it, how much can I generate and how also. So I was really glad and happy when we worked with Cream on Chrome, the Rotterdam-based studio, and it was graphically actually enhanced by the studio Vicky from Warsaw, who is sitting over there playing with their phones. I can see it. We were really glad that Cream on Chrome came up with this idea to also put an orange juicer on the roof with the solar panels, so people could actually really engage with something that they are kind of familiar with something every day, a glass of orange juice that we have for breakfast or during the day, and that you can kind of look at the quantity of the solar power in form of an orange juice, and that helped kind of to understand how much energy can it actually produce. Yeah.
Incredible. I think I saw a hand go up. Are there any questions from our in-person audience? Maybe I was hallucinating. Okay, great. Okay, I saw it over here.
Wait, isn't that my
Throw it. It's your moment.
I was introduced it first time today, and I'm really excited that we have something like that is called a catch box, and I will be the leader of this catch box, and I will throw it now at Marcel.
Save man.
It worked.
Thank
Very
you for this
elegant.
nice present. That's really.
You have to talk into
I
it.
can speak into it. Ooh, that's super cool. No, I was actually interested in all of your researches and all of your practices. If you also took into account maybe the attitude of indigenous people who lived with the sun and understood the sun instead of using the sun. So maybe you can elaborate on that.
I could talk a little bit about it. I actually also the work of Amor for that reason resonated with me because almost a year and a half ago I went to Mozambique, to Inhambane, the province where there is a peninsula called Linga Linga. And together with Studio Paya and Bureau Ruimtekoers, we actually did a design residency there with a group of indigenous artisan women. And they live on Linga Linga, this peninsula, without any electricity, access to electricity or running water in very poor conditions. So actually we got to know each other through this 2-week residency. That was not on the island. Actually, to work with the solar energy and to solder, we actually already needed electricity. So we already had this kind of already a weird threshold, going to a different place from their homes. And then already we got to know each other and they told us the stories of how they lived. But obviously, only when we actually traveled to meet them in their own homes and to stay with them for a long weekend and meet their families. And only then, actually, you get to really understand what it's like in this place that looks like a paradise, but obviously is far, far, far from it. I think, indeed, like Neil already brought it up, like having people in those remote places without the access to the technology also bring in their voice in these developments and not just give them a standard panel that we've developed here in our context that totally doesn't relate or resonate with them. But also all the knowledge that they have from living with the sun. You know, it's like it's ingrained in their bodies, in the way that they treat the environment. I think that's something that we should definitely learn from. That's the main thing that I picked up there. Yeah.
Amor,
Yeah.
please.
Can I throw two?
It's working with these communities. It's very delicate. We should to be very careful with the costumbres. With all the traditions inside of the community. For example, when I start to work with this community, the ladies they have to ask to the husbands if they can, be part of the workshop of the laboratory. So it's important to respect, the traditions of the community, and especially if I'm not from there, especially if I'm a woman from a big city, So, but inside of the laboratory, I have a very beautiful experience, and I have a lot of micro histories to tell about the process of teaching and learning, and it's very beautiful how the women artisans start to learn electronics, but at the same time they compare everything with nature, how they relate all that engineering concepts with elements of nature and elements of that natural environment that they live. And on the other hand, in that kind of communities, pues the tradition is very patriarchal, like machos. So, the women should to be in the kitchen, and the guys, they fix the car, they fix the electric installation. So it was very interesting, the experience to have all in the lab, only women learning electronics and learning about solar energy, because they start to teach to the husbands things about solar energy, and they start to discover, or they realize new things of the reality. For example, one of the participants of the laboratory, one occasion told me, "Hey, Amor, today when I take the transportation to go to the city, I saw that in the highways. I saw that big lights in the street with the solar panels. So I understand all that public light, in the streets, take the solar energy, and it has a battery, and it was very interesting and beautiful how they realize and discover other things of world with this knowledge.
That's an incredible story. Thank you, Amor. So we're about to wrap up, and yes, there's an online question.
There's an online question by Phoebe Stormer. Do you envision a large solar fiber curtain that could be draped from a building and changes in decorative pattern with the seasons? Could this curtain be transparent so it could fit over windows? So that's a solar idea, no?
Well, Pauline.
Yes. I can't say no to that. No, I definitely would imagine something like that.
But have you designed something in that direction?
Not in that direction. I am working on textiles, also with some more translucency, but also materials that can be part of a facade, so really large scale. So indeed, a whole building dressed in a solar textile. So you don't need to only use the roof, but you can actually apply this all around, drape it around, add the color and the patterning of the weaving. I think transparency. I mean, these cells are already semi-transparent, or organic photovoltaics that Marianne also uses a lot in her work. So yeah, we're definitely getting there. I don't see why we wouldn't have this kind of beautiful described idea in the future.
There's actually one exhibit at the Energy Show. It's actually by Studio Ossidiana that actually here in the neighborhood worked with a building that actually is a protected building, and they came up. I mean, it's a prototype stage in a sense that it's only a visualization, but the idea is getting exactly like Phoebe Sturmer is asking in that kind of direction. So thank you, Phoebe, for asking that in the chat.
Thank you. So as a tradition, as we kind of wrap up Material Worlds episode, we'll go around and share how we envision a world that is solar powered. And we're going to go way out, 100 years, if you can imagine, 100 years from now. If you look back to 100 years before in 1920, 22. So how might this world in 100 years from now look to you in your imagination? Maybe just from here, Neil, and go around, and then we'll end with Amor's vision, and then we'll see a kind of film at the very end by Alice.
Sure. That's some radical imagination there. But yeah, I imagine it to be democratic, decentralized, affordable, accessible, and something that anyone around the world owns and can design for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any technology that's inherently good, right? They're all built and sort of, within a context of human systems. So, just because our world might be more heavily reliant on solar power does not necessarily mean it's more equitable or even more environmentally better, right? So I think it takes intentional design and just in, technical design, but also in politics and economic structures to sort of have this world 100 years out that is the world that we all want, which is very close to, for me would be Neil's vision. But I do think we need to sort of, it's important to keep the focus on the fact that we need to be intentional in how we build these systems to ensure that we actually get there, and not just that we say, oh, we have some new technology, problem solved.
Yeah, I think in 100 years of time, the solar panels of today don't exist anymore. It's something really different. And I think hopefully we will look back at solar now as how we look at windmills from the past, for example. Something is like part of our culture, our heritage, and there are buses full of tourists coming to these future solar towers, and we're very proud of it, that's how we used to do it. Nice.
Yeah, my vision of the future in 100 years, I think by that time solar will have gotten very close to us. I imagine our environment, our interiors, but also exteriors of buildings being reupholstered in textiles, obviously. But I also imagine like a whole new language being adopted. So we can talk maybe about solar companionship because we carry solar around with us and we treat it like a companion. Or maybe we have solar gatherings where we sit around a solar picnic blanket or table instead of around a fire. Or so there's all these new energy rituals that may have arisen. And I think the whole variety, I don't think I can even imagine it, because the whole variety of solar, especially with like the influence of people in, say, indigenous cultures or cultures at least that now have way too little access to the technology, we'll have come up with ideas that I cannot even come up with right now. So.
I think that solar energy will be totally low-key technology. Everybody owns it. It's totally normal. It's on your clothes, it's on your roof, it's on the curtains, everywhere. But it's only part of an energy source. I think we get all other kinds of energy sources. We'll be tapping from plants. We'll have the underground, the soil, all the energy that's there. Probably, because I think if we go on in this, we need more and more and more energy. So solar will not be enough, even if it's everywhere. That's what I think.
Amor, what is your vision? You might be muted.
Sorry. Yes, I agree. I think it will be more accessible and democratic, but I'm very worried about the production and fabrication. I think that we should reflect and expect in different ways fabrication because, I don't know, thinking about the raw materials and the people that live in that countries where that raw materials come from. We know all that different issues, no? In some countries with a lot of solar panels, they have a benefit, but there are other countries that will be affected. So it's important to think and about the future fabrication of all that infrastructure for that accessibility.
I think we all completely agree. Thank you so much. Thank you to our guests. And we'll conclude the evening here together watching a film by Alice Wong of her vision of a solar-powered world.
The sun wakes up. Surfaces in our surroundings are activated. You dress yourself with your solar-powered clothes. You take your solar-powered car, go to your work, meet people, plan your day in terms of like sun nourishment. And they are going to do the work. You as a human, you don't see this.
So, okay, wait. I wake up, then I go to take a shower. So if it's winter, it might be that the shower is only 5 minutes warm, and in the summer, it might be it's warm for an hour.
And metered and more efficient.
You have to accept a bit more that sometimes there's flaws in the systems, maybe.
The reality is, yes, things will need to be given up.
Then I go to my work, or I have food. And I think, everything will be the same, I guess, in this regard, because it's going to be electricity they're using, so...
If we could make energy way more visible...
Once people have more ownership of their own systems...
Also would make people a lot more aware of what they are doing.
Then people are more accountable for it.
What it takes to create that access to solar energy. Would it be a utopian future, or might it be more dystopian than we imagine it to be?
Depends on exactly what we do in our transition.
We want to change the system to a different sets of pleasure, enjoyment, public good.
Wow, what if this can be very beautiful, something we want to be surrounded with?
It will be used that you can give very attractive aesthetics. You can play around with solar.
It can be basically everything. It can be the most beautiful glitter paint you paint onto your buildings.
It will come in many different forms, much more diversity.
Whatever, I haven't figured it out either.
Key aspect is it will be everywhere.
I'm rather skeptical about solar power because most people that buy a solar panel, 5 years later, there's a new solar panel that's more efficient. They throw away this old panel.
And now everybody gets an electric bike, and I'm like, but you used to bike with your legs.
It's good to bike electrical because you're old and it's maybe harder to bike. But we don't need an electrical bike.
I don't think it's always advancement.
We should not focus on this, but focus on bigger things.
How we can start designing solutions that the onus is not on the consumer or the user, but it's the default choice that you would make the right one.
If something in the future will be considered broken if it doesn't generate its own energy. The energy harvesting is so embedded in like the beginning, how you start designing it.
If it's possible to take it from its surroundings.
It's a different approach.
Is a kind of democratization of energy an excellent starting point.
And slowly work towards a combination of the three: wind energy, solar energy, and hydrogen. And that would be like the wet dream, of course.
Our motto is every surface generates solar energy or can generate solar energy.
Now are basically saying, well, let's really dig our heels in even deeper, invest in managing the earth even better.
So I have these almost superhuman powers.
Let's cloud seed and put mirrors in the sky and reflect the sun back.
And I've come to depend on them.
Really? Does that not seem like it could create more problems than it would solve?
If we just think of solar power as a clean energy, as opposed to fossil fuels being a dirty energy, if that's all we're imagining, a solar future will look a lot like a fossil fuel present. It'll just be powered differently.
I don't believe we can go back.
Energy Humanities is now looking forward.
What about energies connected with justice?
They're going to be pluralists. There's going to be a lot of different ways that different communities and regions figure out how to get enough energy for a good life and how to make it more just and sustainable.
We relate to each other differently, that we think about a day differently. We think about labor in some kind of new way.
Work that is less alienating for people, that's more meaningful.
There isn't property relations in the same way.
That celebrates arts and creativity.
There isn't ownership over the means of production.
If you had a little excess energy, you could actually share it with your neighbor, or you could purchase it from them.
That means that some people work for other people. All of those things are great things to develop. They don't get created by having solar energy.
Use this moment as an opportunity to not only address one single issue such as energy, but rather think about it as part of a holistic system
that encompasses all that matters and all that is thriving.
A much more diverse and distributed system of power.
Not only fix landscapes, but prevent landscapes from further being exploited and transformed. More in tune with the more than human world.
It can be also a great way to reconnect to the one sun that we have.
Right? I mean, when we look at cultures around the world, the worship of the sun is a universal fact.
Like life itself is extremely solarian.
We had a lot of time in the last 30 years to think about different systems. We don't have to speculate anymore of how we go forward, but we have to make clear decisions right now to act.
As social actors, as activists, as intellectuals, as artists, et cetera, is to understand that the coming solarity is going to be a terrain of social and political struggle, not a ready-made solution.
Of course, so I'm very constantly aware with it and trying to do stuff about it, but at the same time, a lot of people around me are like, yeah, but your individual motivation is not going to change anything and so on.
I don't want you to be an expert. I want you to be you, and I want you to think about what new kinds of energy could do for you. What you should think about is the relationship of energy systems to your life, and how a different kind of energy system would produce a different kind of life, So it can be small things.
People are developing really interesting answers to this.
Thank you very much for the attendance of this event. The great thing is we have a bar outside.